Today, we're switching on the lights. Literally. I've worked in the energy sector, and let me tell you, it's a world of high stakes, heavy regulation, health and safety, and massive transformation. From smart meters to grid upgrades to decarbonisation targets, energy isn't just power lines and billing systems. It's a data-rich, politically charged, customer-facing, and deeply technical space. So here are 10 hard truths and helpful tips for any BA who's interested in working in the energy sector.
The Better Business Analysis Institute
presents the Better Business Analysis podcast with
Benjamin Walsh.
Back to the Better Business Analysis podcast with your host, Benjamin Walsh. I have been unwell with the flu for the last couple of weeks, so thanks for joining me this week. We are talking about 10 hard truths when it comes to working in the energy sector. And the energy sector is quite large. I've worked in the generation space. I've worked in the space where we sell to consumers, which happened to be one company, Genesis Energy, as a contractor. I also worked for a company, Enlightened Designs, that had quite a few clients in the energy sector, including Mighty River Power, which was a generator of hydropower, and we helped them with their billing system. Separately to that, I worked at Z Energy, both as an enterprise business analyst and a BA, senior BA, working across some of the asset stuff there and just generally putting together their portfolio. So I have touched into a few areas. There probably are other areas where I've worked where energy has been a focus area. So today I'm going to talk about 10 tips which I think will help you. Number one is that it's critical infrastructure, okay? Energy is an essential service. It's a commodity that we all need. And failure isn't just an outage. It can be a national issue. Your systems affect homes and hospitals, transport, the vulnerable, and industry, of course. And if you're an analyst doing some fault reporting for a grid provider, in New Zealand that's Transpower, where I know a lot of people work, our grid is managed by them, your work affects how fast line crews get dispatched after a storm, and that's a public safety impact and an issue. So it's quite important, the work that you do. So I think that's the first point. The tip there is that you should always map your work to the critical operations in energy. So that's the key outcome or value that you provide. So what's the customer impact if this area failed? I think that's the way to look at it in terms of something special. Obviously, you can apply all the other dimensions in the way that you look at things, but for energy, it's ultimately about making sure that that person has access to the energy in whatever format that is or channel that they need it. Okay, so that's the critical part. Number two is that much like banking, which I haven't had much to do apart from clients in banking, is that legacy systems are deeply embedded. You'll find mainframes, ancient asset registers, and brittle integrations. And your transformation efforts often involve tiptoeing around 25-year-old systems, still running core systems. Now, it's not good enough to pull those out. So as opposed to other areas where you maybe focus on the future state more, I always talk about that. Current state analysis might actually be a requirement, a deep requirement here, because you can't move the existing system. And much like, I guess, if you think about controllers, hardware controllers, so the energy has a lot of hardware involved in it with switching and whatnot, and some of that, the programming that allows that to happen is usually in lower level programming languages like C, for example. And those systems are older, they're reliable, they are highly regulated. And so your systems, your newer systems, which are written with higher level programming languages, aka things like web work and web apps, they have to talk to those systems. And it's not, you can't just easily rip out those hardware-based systems. So an example here is that your new API platform needs to talk to a billing system built in, say, Cobalt, because it might read Cobalt was an old programming language still used, and that Cobalt and C are like this lower level language that is really good at talking to hardware or written on kind of mission critical systems. And a lot of times those devs are old, they're retiring. There's only a few people that know how the systems work. So that current state analysis, you're almost doing an as-built when you start. That sometimes is a requirement. The tip here is that don't promise seamless integration, okay, without checking technical reality. It is an area of integration that's really important, and always include those tech SMEs in early discovery. It's critical that you do that. Number 3 is that asset data is a mess, okay, and it matters a lot. So from subsystems to transformers to poles, energy businesses rely on knowing what they own, okay, where they are in that condition. So I did a massive asset management piece of work for Z Energy, which is a petroleum owns, basically the main provider of petrol in New Zealand, as in it has a national contract to the government, so it's critical. We have BP, we have all the others here, but Z Energy is specifically responsible for keeping the network alive. And so you need to really know what your assets are. And when Shell, which you might know, was acquired by Infratel and then rebranded to Z Energy in New Zealand, Shell's assets weren't in good condition. So we had to do a huge asset audit and put our processes in place. So there was incomplete, inconsistent information, duplicate records, and we were outsourcing the maintenance to other providers. So we really needed to do that from start. That was one of my bigger projects when I first started at Z. So your project to automate maintenance schedules might stall because you don't actually know where, I don't know, all the valves are on a petrol station. Or we had examples where there was a lot of the tanks that go underneath a petrol station were old and needed to be replaced. Well, we didn't really know the state of them. Some of them actually went over property lines to properties we didn't own. So there's a lot going on there. A BA tip there is to validate your assumptions about the data early, including the asset data, run sample audits, talk to field ops, and they'll tell you what's really missing, or they'll tell you what they don't know, which is just as important, and that's risk, and that, you need time to resolve those problems. And it can be quite expensive to find out where your assets actually are, and that's sometimes needed. Number 4 is that regulation, and we've talked about this before in education, but this is a different type of regulation. This is more like in education, you have the kind of carrot, what you're aiming for. In the energy industry, regulation shapes everything, but more from a stick point of view. It's okay, if you don't do it, you're in trouble. So regulatory compliance is consistent and complex. You have pricing reviews, emission targets, reliability standards, making sure you've not got a monopoly sometimes in commodities. You need to make sure that you're not ripping people off. The Commerce Commission or the government department that make sure that you're not price fixing and whatnot is all over you in the industry. So your analysis often supports regulatory reporting, and it needs to be ready for audit, government audit, independent government audit. An example might be a change to network reliability standards means you need to update how outages are measured across 4 systems, for example. And BA tip might be always ask, is this linked to a compliance obligation? If yes, prioritize clarity and transparency over everything else. Okay, so you need to make sure you've, if this could be audited, so an external auditor is looking at your work. Health and safety is the other aspect in this industry that's quite hot. Number 5, and this is something I found at probably both Genesis and Z Energy, is that the transition to green energy is real and fast. So yes, the world is currently changing politically at the moment, but decarbonisation is actually a live project and not a future plan. So you'll find that seems ironic, but the companies that may be responsible for more of our greenhouse gas emissions or industries, so energy, production of energy is generally has, either digging for coal, which is what Genesis was doing, or Z Energy, which is importing fuel or refining fuel at the time when I was there. They are looking at, there's a lot of pressure on them, and they are looking at ways in which to decarbonize what they do. So wind, solar, EVs, Z bought, energy distribution company Flick in order to do more stuff in EVs. They invested in some other initiatives around that space, like biofuels. So the idea of distributed generation, solar, it's kind of up. I guess it's flipping around how grids are managed, because the whole grid, which is a huge infrastructure area, is managed to deal with, basically major producers producing electricity and it going a long way. When you start generating your own power at home, the grid has trouble handling that. So it's quite interesting in that space. Your customer solution needs to assume energy flowed one way, but now half of your users have solar panels that feed back to the grid. You need to think about how that works. You need to get familiar with the energy transition glossary, like two-way flows, grid edge, virtual power plants. They're not buzzwords. They're actually requirements when it comes to designing the future. Number 6 is that customers are finally in the room. So energy used to be provider-centric. Now it's about consumer choice, pricing transparency, usage insights, and even code generation, right? So CX, customer experience, is no longer optional. It's actually a differentiator. And my friend Dana Jacobson, which we talked about, we've talked with him before about product management, and listen to that episode if you haven't listened to it. He worked at Z Energy on a few apps there. It's really true that in a market where there's a marketplace with players, lots of different players, energy becomes a commodity good, and the differentiator is the CX, the customer experience that you provide. And how easy it is to pay, how, all the things that annoy you, if they are dealt with by an energy provider, you will generally stick with them. You might have a mobile app that lets users see real-time energy usage, pay bills, and even sell surplus solar. That's BA territory now. We're good at all that stuff. So that's where the BA is adding value to the traditional energy industry. And a BA tip is to map the end-to-end customer journey. Even if your work is on the back end, show how everything is connected. So there's a modeling tool called iDiff. If you think about a process, so just a black box in the middle, which is the energy industry or generating energy, above you might have all the regulatory things you have to worry about. And then below that, so you can just list those. And then below that box, you can list all the customer journey that requires you in order to deliver that, the customer touch points. That's probably, you could just do that on an A4 piece of paper, and that can help. There are really two main aspects that will help you when you start modeling anything in the energy industry. Number 7 is that projects often span years. So grid upgrades, ERP replacements, decarbonisation projects, these are multi-year, multi-phase projects. You need patience, documentation discipline. It's actually important to have some documentation, because you probably might not be around if you started the project. You might not be the person who finishes it. And strong traceability. Okay, this is more important in the energy industry than it is in, say, education. If you join like a smart meter rollout, the context you need, it could be like buried in SharePoint folders from 2019. when they first started doing the audit and, the cost benefit analysis. The BA tip is to build continuity into your artifacts, right? So do things like version controls and try and archive old material, but don't lose it. These are the latest versions, things like that. Think, if someone picks this up in 12 months, will they understand the why and what I was trying to achieve? I've had projects before where I've been rung up 10 years later, where people have said my name's on a document, they found me on LinkedIn. It's happened maybe 3 times, 3 times. And they've asked me about a project that I rolled out. So it does matter, and it does show that projects get picked up later if they're not fully rolled out by the time you leave. Number 8 is, health and safety, or safety and risk. They're non-negotiable in the energy industry. There can be a lot of moving parts, and like I said, a lot of hardware. And so risk is high. Petrol companies, for example, and Z Energy were very hot on health and safety and mindfulness at the station. So when you fill up your gas at your gas station, how people used to talk about the idea about a mobile phone and how, you shouldn't use your mobile phone at a petrol station. Wow, I can tell you this. I know that we've had Mythbusters show that it's very unlikely that a mobile phone will start a fire at a petrol company station. It's very unlikely that will spark a fire. The reason why you're told not to use your mobile phone at a petrol station isn't about the risk of it blowing up the place. It is actually the fact that it's a distraction. And so what actually happens at a service station lots of times is that people get hit by cars. And so if you're on your mobile phone while you're filling up gas and you walk across the forecourt to go to the shop area where you want to pay, a lot of people get hit by cars. And that's the reason why petrol companies tell you not to use your cell phone on forecourt. So you're often designing for high-risk environments in the energy industry, high voltage, remote assets, moving targets, field crews, and your analysts can affect worker safety and risk reporting. You need to, for example, let's say you're redesigning the job dispatch screen for a lineman who fixes lines in power lines. If you are missing a checkbox, that could mean that someone is in a live zone because you've missed out, maybe a tick box about saying that's something, this is a live target. It hasn't, the energy hasn't been turned off yet for that line. So in terms of the BA tip here, always include health and safety and operational risk in your stakeholder list, always, and their insights are essential. So get them involved. Number 9, you need to speak 2 languages. And the 2 languages here is business, the obvious one we speak, and engineering. So you find that engineers run a lot of these energy generation places. It's the way they operate. They're very black and white. So BAs must bridge the gap between engineers who live in this kind of different world and executives who care about customer churn and return on investment. You're the translator between kind of amps, if you like, and accounts. Engineers want, an example here might be, engineers want to trial a voltage optimization algorithm, for example, and you need to shape it into a business case with clear benefits and risks. I had an example here where I was working, the Huntly is a place in New Zealand. It's not, known as the place that everyone wants to live, an industrial town between 2 main centres. And that's where Genesis Energy had a coal plant where coal was extracted and was also burnt there. And I was working on an emissions project where Genesis had to report on emissions. I did a lot of work at the actual station and driving around to different parts of the business. And I worked with the guys who burnt the fuel and figured out exactly what the issue was with the legislation that we had to report on. So there was actually an issue with the legislation that made it very practically difficult to do this reporting accurately. Came up with an algorithm and we presented our findings. But I would never have known that if I hadn't gone right down to literally the coal face to understand how that worked. So build relationship with technical SMEs. Earlier when I say technical, I don't mean IT technical. I mean the people on the ground generating or transmitting or fixing the lines. Then translate their logic into language that the boardroom understands. And we were able to do that. And actually the government understood at that point. And number 10 is sustainability isn't a department, it's everywhere. So having sustainability goals are embedded as part of the product, ops, procurement, strategy. Every BA initiative needs to consider its environmental impact because this industry has a microscope on its operations to make sure it's not waste. It's not wasting, it's sustainable because it's generating, carbon and affecting the environment. So you find that there's more of a focus on sustainability. Say, for example, a procurement tool was looking at CO2 intensity, right? And maybe it was scoring it as part of a supplier evaluation. So we were going to only engage with suppliers who had a great way of measuring their CO2, and we wanted to work with someone who had efficient processes for that. That would be something that you would find in the energy industry, more so than maybe other areas now. Okay, it's now banking has it and all the rest of it, because banking's around choice, but you'll find that the industry has more of that. So what I would suggest is that you include sustainability criteria in your problem statement and your solution options, and it's not a nice to have in the energy industry. So that's your high voltage BA breakdown of the energy sector. It's a space where data is vast, systems are old, and pressure to change is real. But it's also a sector where your analysis work can drive massive national outcomes like cleaner air, smarter energy use, and safer systems. And if you're up for a challenge with real-world impacts, energy is worth plugging into. If this has sparked something for you, share it with a fellow BA and subscribe for more practical breakdowns across different industries. And as always, keep asking better questions. I'll see you next week.